Hello and welcome to the Georgia Department of Education Virtual PLC for Visual Arts High School 3D Art. Walk through selecting and preparing materials, transferring the image to the surface, and some other tips and tricks for the type of portrait murals that I have experience with. I hope the information I provide will demonstrate how manageable this project can be, and you'll find that it can be applied to this specific project or something similar that you might take on with your own students. I'll begin with selecting and preparing materials. For our portrait murals, we use 3/8 inch plywood panels. The 1/2 inch can be pretty heavy and seem a little cumbersome, and then the 1/2 inch is pretty flimsy and can sometimes develop a warp to it, even from the moisture of the paint. The plywood comes in 4 by 8 foot sheets, which we have cut down into 4 by 4 foot sections. Obviously, if your composition requires different dimensions that can work within that 4 by 8 foot, that will work for you. I've always been able to get ours cut down at the home improvement store for free, especially when you mention that you're a teacher and it's for a student project. They're usually really wonderful about that. If you're only purchasing one or two, though, it might be worth it just to get the pre-cut. The pre-cuts come in 4 by 4, 2 by 4, and 2 by 2 foot sections. If you need something irregularly shaped, you'll probably have to cut it by yourself, but the 3 inch thickness of the plywood cuts pretty well using a jigsaw. When you're selecting your plywood, I would suggest inspecting the sheets. You don't want to just grab them off the top of the stack. You want to make sure at least one side is relatively flaw-free. Since the type of plywood we tend to use isn't super premium, there can be knots or splits on the surface layer. And you can fill imperfections with wood filler, and you might need to sand down the edges, and that's fine. But the more flaw-free they are, the better. And then you want to always treat your wood with primer. If you don't have primer, gesso should work just fine. For the mural painting itself, we usually use house paint. At this point, we've done enough of the murals and other large-scale projects that we've stockpiled quite a few color options. And if we need tints and shades, we usually have some black and white laying around, but it might be worth it to purchase those, because if you have a color, these do tend to be monochromatic. You could just purchase the tints and shades. If you're just getting started, it might be worth it to put out an all call to your school for leftover home project paint that people might have that they just don't need anymore. Since these particular murals are done in arbitrary colors, it makes it a little bit easier. Though students should have freedom of choice with their subject, I do suggest them getting final approval from you prior to starting. And as mentioned previously, it might also be a good idea to get approval, or at least keep your admin in the loop, so they understand what the subject will be and what the work is going to look like. Students may generate their own imagery, or they might select resources from the internet. It's always a good idea to utilize copyright-free images, so a place like Creative Commons is a good spot to get imagery. And then you always want to make sure that the use of the image does not cross the lines of plagiarism, of course. Students might struggle with enlarging or drawing the image to the needed scale, so using projectors work really well. That could be for using the old school enlargers, or it could be the your overhead projectors on the board. We find that the old school ones, because they're portable, work really well, and we've managed to get a few, so we have about 5 of them that we can use. But once the students have that image enlarged on their panel, it doesn't really take that long for them to trace it out. For the portraits we do at my school, we do format the images to break them down into shapes, and I'll do this step by step in the next episode. The students start with a border around the panel and then adjust the projector so that the image, and we figure out the ratio. So since they're working on a square, we make sure that the image is a square. And so they start with a border, they adjust the image, and then they trace it. And once the image and text is transferred to the panel, then they can, if it's helpful, they can create a paint by number where they go in and they designate maybe a 1 for all the highlights and a 2 for the lightest tone, and then 3 and 4 and 5 and so on, to designate a number for each color. Students then select the colors that they will use, and as mentioned earlier, this is often going to be monochromatic, but not always. So it is worth assisting them in color schemes and values that will work best. A good rule is that the fewer colors, the better. So, I think that not only is it visually better, but it is less expensive. So here you see that there are only about 5 or 6 colors in total on each of the murals on this slide. And there's still a nice full range. When the painting is complete, the students go back and refine the border. They touch up any areas needing some refinement. And then, the project is done and ready to completely dry. And we usually have them dry over the summer, and then they're ready for installation. And then there you have it, a meaningful legacy for you and your students to leave behind.